Hi, this is a short video to explain diatonic and secondary dominant chord scales and to describe how to do this particular assignment. So in this assignment, the first task is to figure out what the chords are, put the chord symbols, then analyze them, and then on this page write the chord scales for the chords. It's in the key of C, and you may notice that periodically there are chords with accidentals. Those are going to be the secondary dominants for the most part, and all roots are in the bass. So we look at this first chord, we see that it's a C, a B, and an E, so that's a C major 7. The chord doesn't have to have a fifth necessarily, as long as it has a root third and seventh. So you're going to you would then label that as a C major 7, 1 major 7. I've already done that for you just to get you started. So C major 7. And then we look at this next one. It's already given you a clue as to what it is, but you see it's a B chord. It's got an A and a D sharp, and an F sharp up there. That's clearly a B7. Label that. And of course the function of that chord is 5, 7, and 3 in this key. And let's see what happens when we get here. Well, that's an E, a G, and a D, and that's a B, so that's clearly an E minor 7. And you just go on like that and you label that. That would be 3 minor 7, and so on. Then you would apply any necessary arrows and brackets as needed. You go on through that. So let's talk about chord scales now. And by the way, there is audio for this that should be posted with the assignment that you can listen to the progression. So diatonic chord scales are very straightforward. They are just chord tones plus the surrounding diatonic notes. So it's all diatonic. If you're using a key signature, there's going to be no accidentals. And it's really just a matter of how do you label the notes. So let's take E minor as an example. I'll change this to an E minor. We're in the key of C. And all you do with any diatonic chord scales, you simply always start, actually with any chord scale, you always start with the chord tones. Just put them in. And just a reminder that a chord scale is not a chord scale until it's been labeled. We label those. Obviously, there's not much to think about here. This is the 1, this is the flat 3. These are just chord tones. And then we have done that part. But the next part is crucial. This is the non-chord tones in between. Now remember, it's a diatonic chord scale. It's 100% diatonic. There's no accidentals. All right? And then it's time to label them. Now the way we label them is that any note which is a whole step above a chord tone is deemed available. It's an available sound. I've demonstrated this in class. It's a sound that will blend with the chord function well. But on the other hand, any note that is not a whole step above a chord tone will be problematic. It will be too dissonant for the chord. So let's look at this one first. This is an A. It is in fact a whole step above the G, so it's labeled as a tension. Tensions are always labeled with by their compound name, meaning their name which is more than an octave above the root. And the reason for that, of course, is that tensions are derived by building thirds above the chord. So up to here we have a root, a third, a fifth, a seventh, and then we have a ninth, and then we have an 11th. You can see that's an A, and that's what that is. That's why it's called an 11. Even if it were to be voiced lower in that chord, it would still be called an 11. So even if it was down here, it would still be called an 11. And because it's an available tension, it's going to be called T11. Again, the rule for available tensions on non-diatonic chords is if it is one whole step above the chord tone below, when written in chord scale format, it is an available tension. So you can try it out for yourself. Play an E minor 7 in your left hand and play an A on top, and you'll hear it's a very pleasant, interesting sound that fits with the chord function. That's an available tension, whole step above a chord tone. When it's not a whole step above a chord tone, like this F above E, it's a half step above, then that's not an available note. It's not an available tension. Instead, it's called a harmonic avoid note, and it's labeled with the letter S, meaning it is available in the scale but not to be emphasized in the chord. In this case, the interval is a minor second, so it's called S flat 2. This is a half step above as well, and this is S flat 6. And one final thing is when we're handwriting these, we typically make any of these harmonic avoid notes be a solid note head to help them further stand out as being notes that we have to handle with care. So this is 3 minor 7 in the key of C, E minor 7, and this is the chord scale that goes with it. Chord scales are diatonic chord scales are labeled by their modal names. So the modes in order are Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. And so this is the third mode. So Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian. This is a Phrygian chord scale, and that's a diatonic. That's an example of a diatonic chord scale. Okay, moving on to secondary dominant chord scales. Secondary dominant chord scales are more liberal. They can have notes which are a whole step above a chord tone, but they can also have notes which are half step above a chord tone. Either one can be made work. The only one that can't work is a note called S4, which will always occur in any secondary dominant chord scale. It's the fourth scale degree. It's always avoided as a chord to be in the chord voicing because it's the root of the target, and we don't want to play the root of the target before the target the chord has resolved. You can think of this as like a question, and that's the answer. So you want the question and then the clear answer. You don't want to put the answer in with the question. So we don't do S4 as a available tension. We use it as a harmonic avoid note to be used only as a passing tone. But everything else is available. So how do we decide? Well, here's the key point. All notes will be diatonic. All non-chord tones will be diatonic. So how do we do a secondary dominant chord scale? Very simple. First, we do the chord tones, like with any chord scale. Make sure that you do spell the chord correctly, because there will be at least one accidental in any secondary dominant. And then you label your chord tones. 1, 3, 5, flat 7. Okay, and now it's time to deal with the non-chord tones. Well, just read that sentence again. All non-chord tones are diatonic. So just put in the diatonic notes that are in between the chord tones, and bingo, you have the correct notes. Now all that's left to do is label them. If it's a whole step above, it will be T9. If it's a half step above, it will be T flat 9. If it's a whole step above the fifth, it will be 13. If it's a half step above, it will be flat 13. So D above C, whole step, T9. A above G, whole step, T13. F above E, half step, that is the S4 sound. And you would color that in. There you go. You just wrote the chord scale for 5, 7, and 4 in the key of C, and the name of this scale is Mixolydian because it's a straight Mixolydian scale. The structure of it is like the basic Mixolydian scale you would encounter on the 5 chord of a major key. Straight Mixolydian is T9, T13, S4. But we can get variations on Mixolydian in situations where the 9 and the 13 are different than that. Again, it's all governed by what's diatonic. So let's do another one. Let's do E7, 5, 7, and 3. And here we go. I'm going to put the chord tones first. And then you can pause the video if you want and do more of it and then check and see if you were right. Go ahead and label those chord tones. Okay, pause the video again if you want to try the next thing before getting the answer. The next thing is to fill in the in-between notes, the notes that are not non-chord tones, but which are 100% diatonic. Okay, now you can see those notes are all there, and every single non-chord tone is diatonic. There's no accidentals on the non-chord tones. Okay, now it's time to label them. So again, you can pause the video if you want to do it and then check back for your answer. So this note is a half step above a chord tone, so it's T flat 9. This note is a half step above the chord tone, so it's T flat 13. And this note is the ever-present S4. Now I'm going to mention one more thing. In this particular scale, and this will happen in a few of these secondary dominant chord scales, there's actually an extra diatonic note here between the flat 9 and the 3, and you may notice that it's a G natural. A G natural would be an additional diatonic note. This scale is fine the way it is, but if you wanted to make use of that additional diatonic note, you could go ahead and put it in, and it would be G natural, not G sharp. G sharp is the third of the chord. This is a non-chord tone G natural. And this would be called, and it might be a little confusing, but this would be called a sharp 9. The reason it's called a sharp 9 is because you can't have 2/3 in a chord. You can't have a major third and a minor third in a chord. So whenever you have a major and minor third, the major third is always the real third, and this becomes a tension sharp 9. Now it could be spelled as 9, which would be F double sharp, but it's so much easier to read and to notice that it's diatonic by spelling it like this. So this is the typical way to spell a sharp 9 as a diatonic note whenever possible. Even though it looks like a flat 3, it's really functioning as a sharp 9. So this scale, which turned out to be an 8-note scale when we added in that extra note, would be called mixo. It's still a mixolydian scale, but it's not the typical mixo with T9 and T13. It's mixo flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13. That is the actual name of the scale, and it's because we have to capture the fact that it has some altered tensions in it. All right, those are your secondary dominant chord scales. That's how you do them. Again, it's chord tones plus diatonic tensions. Sometimes those diatonic tensions will be T9 or T13. Sometimes they'll be T flat 9 or T flat 13. It just depends on the chord and what are the diatonic notes as non-chord tones. And that's it. That's how you do it. The only time you're going to have an accidental with secondary dominant chord scales is when you're spelling the chord. But the non-chord tones will be 100% diatonic. So apply that, what you've learned here, after you've analyzed this whole thing, and apply that when you write out the chord scales on page 2. Now I did a few of them for you, started some of them, and then you do the rest.